Welcome, folks, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be dialing in from around the world. Welcome to America's Future Series. Today, for our supply chain resilience and critical supply chain event, I have with us Major General Sharpten of what was formerly known as Operation Warp Speed, is now called the Federal COVID-19 Response. He and his team brought together expertise and leadership from around the government to execute on a program that is, to me, only on the scale of the Manhattan Project. In some ways, Major General Sharpten, to me, is a modern-day Leslie Groves, bringing science, supply chain, technology, and a whole variety of disciplines together to create something during a national emergency. General, thank you so much for joining us today. We're truly honored to have you with us, and we're just really interested in the discussion moving forward. Before we jump into real specifics, a lot has been written about the federal response to the last 20 months. Would you please share your experience in bringing it together and kind of how it happened?
Well, Zaheer, thank you very much. I appreciate that warm welcome. And, for the extended team that's out there, I just want to say thank you for having me on the session today. I really view these calls as extremely important because we need to ensure that the message gets out about what's actually happening and what we're delivering for the nation when it comes to therapeutics, vaccines, as well as diagnostics that are out there. What I asked Zaheer to do is just provide a little bit of an opening so I can really set the scene and lead into some more detailed questions and answers following it. What I'll do is I'll keep my opening comments concise because I think the most important thing we can do is really get to the questions that are important to the audience out there. So our mission here, and really, I'm a military member, so I really have to focus in on what's my mission. And our mission is to produce and deliver safe and effective vaccines and therapeutics to the American people. It's as simple as that. And if we're not doing things that directly affect that mission, then our question is, why do we do that? And so really that enables us to stay focused on truly the most important thing, and that's delivering safe and effective vaccines and therapeutics. First and foremost, I'm going to emphasize that this is a whole of America approach. We know that we'll succeed because we have the unparalleled expertise of Health and Human Service scientists, Department of Defense planning and logistics and contracting capability, as well as American ingenuity from our industry partners and academia innovation. Every day, we're partnering with all elements of that to make our mission here a success. So in my opinion, and it's my humble opinion here, we have the world's best scientists and doctors working with the world's best military with the support of American industry. And that's really what the operation is all about. We'll continue that focus. And again, I think that's the power of what we're going to bring in order to accomplish our mission, is bringing all those diverse talents together onto one team. What I'd really like to do is just provide a quick update on our current situation right now. So since the FDA released the emergency use authorizations for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, we've been allocating the FDA-approved vaccine doses based on availability from the manufacturer. And those allocations are based on a pro rata data of the jurisdiction's adult population. So in addition to the 64 state, territory, and major metropolitan city jurisdictions, there are also separate allocations that we align to 5 federal entities: the Department of State, Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, Indian Health Service, and the Bureau of Prisons. So as of today, just this morning, and I pulled the report as of 8 a.m. this morning, Eastern Time, there's 124 million doses available for ordering. Over 94 million of those doses have been ordered by the various jurisdictions and federal entities, and 82 million doses have been delivered. Another 11.9 million doses are currently in transit for delivery within the next 72 hours. The one metric that we watch very closely every day is the actual uptake metric, or literally the shots that go into arms. And currently, as of this morning, the CDC is tracking 64.2 million doses have gone into the arms of Americans around the country. So really our federal role here at the operation is focused on accelerating the research and development, the manufacturing, the distribution of vaccines to the jurisdictions. We rely very heavily on the jurisdictions, the states, territories, major metropolitan cities, to provide the administration or the uptake of those vaccines to their population. They know their infrastructure best, they know their population best, and they know how to reach out and vaccinate their people. And that's why it's a partnership between the federal government and essentially the state and territorial governments that are out there. What I'd like to do is just take a little step back and talk about, how do we do this? What's our process, our structure? What's the culture by which we do this? So the complexity of this environment is really defined by being both public and private. It is a public-private partnership that makes us so successful. The public part is heavily Health and Human Services and Department of Defense, but really it's a comprehensive interagency effort with many federal entities involved. In our operations center here around me, we have Health and Human Services, Department of Defense, CDC, Department of State, Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs, Indian Health Service, Bureau of Prisons, and FEMA, literally operating not within 20 feet of my door right now. The public part does expand, though, in scope as you consider the 64 separate state, territory, and major metropolitan city jurisdictions that we partner with. While the federal government is responsible for the acceleration of the development, manufacture, and distribution of vaccines and therapeutics, it's the jurisdictions who are responsible for the uptake, the shots in arms, as I mentioned earlier. Now, the public-private part, the private part, is a network of industry partners we've been collaborating with to develop, manufacture, distribute, and administer vaccines and therapeutics. There are over 40 companies we work with on a daily basis. But based on the significant daily coordinating requirements, we have industry representatives working inside of our operations center here outside my door, including Pfizer, Controllant, McKesson, FedEx, UPS Healthcare, Walgreens, and CVS. So our Mission Command Center here in DC, our Vaccine Operations Center, is functionally aligned to ensure we can operationalize the policies, systems, and processes, as well as coordinate the resources necessary to run this enterprise. We also run a separate coordination center in Atlanta, co-located with the CDC headquarters. And that coordination center is aligned regionally to ensure that we can cater to the needs of the 64 jurisdictions that are out there. Moving forward, I think with that, I've provided a lot of information. I'll just close my opening comments here. I just wanted to provide a quick foundation of who we are, our intended goals, and how we're organized to deliver effects. And Zaheer, what I'll do is I'll pause here so that we can go into more detailed questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General, and thanks for baselining that with providing people a baseline of knowledge. 64 million doses delivered. That's remarkable. That would be on the scale of 20-ish% of the entire U.S. population. That's just a heck of a thing to have done in just a few months, and that kind of leads into what one of my questions was. The program achieved something that was not considered possible by a lot of people. Just to be frank, what would you say are some of your key learnings from that? What worked that perhaps surprised you, that is different from the way things have been done in the past? And what do we need to remember and learn from that to move forward with?
Well, I think what's key to remember is if we look at the traditional vaccination process, that's normally a process that takes 8 to 10 years to develop.
Right.
And because it's based in safety and science, I think that's completely appropriate. But as we came in and the pandemic's effects continue to affect America in so many different ways, it affects our culture, it affects our children going to school, it affects our economy. we realized that the pandemic could have a crushing effect not only on the United States, but really across the globe. And so this effort was built to accelerate the capability. And that capability really comes down to, first, it was diagnostics, the ability to test our people.
Right.
And then it went in quickly into therapeutics. So when you do get sick, there's
what do you do?
Remedies out there to mitigate the risk of the disease. And then vaccinations or vaccines, again, normally it's an 8 to 10 year process because everything is done sequentially. They try to isolate the virus, and then they try to build in laboratory an ability to fight it. And then once testing is done, then they can go into the details of clinical trials. And normally there's 4 clinical trials associated with every vaccine test. And those, again, are done sequentially. What we were able to do in a lot of the efforts for vaccine development for us was not do them sequentially, but essentially do them in parallel. And so by using US government dollars in partnership with industry and academia, we were able to rapidly accelerate the testing of what the virus was, and then move immediately into clinical trials once they had a viable product that worked inside the lab. So in many cases, the clinical trials were done on overlapping processes. So when we had just enough safety data from the early clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials, which are done in the lab and with animals, we were able to start human trials, phase 3 clinical trials. And then with US government dollars invested, when we started to see positive success with phase 3 clinical trials, we worked with industry to start the production in advance of an EUA, an emergency use authorization. And so by using government dollars, we were able to buy down risk with the 7 production companies that were working on developing a vaccine candidate for us. And so in that 10 to 12 year period that it normally takes to build a vaccine, we're able to reduce that in time between 8 to 12 months. And all along, we never sacrificed safety and science. It was just about buying down business risk with US government dollars to assist in providing a vaccine that the FDA could consider sooner rather than later. And I'll pause there, Zaheer. I think that was just one of the main points that really helped us in terms of addressing the needs that were created because of this pandemic.
But that's a really critical point, is the use of the public funds to reduce the business risk. I imagine that there's going to be a lot of case studies in supply chain, business risk, and R&D management written around the activities that you've done. More than we can cover in just a half an hour or so here. So if you allow me, I'd like to move on to another question. And this one is about the partnerships. You mentioned how critical partnerships were to your success. Public, private, state, local, federal, and the different territories. As head of supply and distribution, what worked in bringing those things together? What learnings can you take forward from that? And possibly what were the challenges, perhaps, that besides perhaps the obvious ones of getting a bunch of different organizations to work together?
You know, I'll go back to Winston Churchill once said, the worst part about working in a coalition environment is working with your allies. However, there's no way we can win without fighting with our allies together to achieve an effect. And for those of you that potentially have had service within the United States government, it's extremely hard to operate within the bureaucracy to get something done within an agency or within a department.
Yes, sir.
It's magnified exponentially when you try to get 2 agencies to work together.
Right, it's multiplicative, it's not additive.
It's not. And so what's interesting is this has been, and I've been on many interagency efforts in the past, both humanitarian assistance, disaster response, as well as conflict with foreign adversaries. But I would tell you, this is the one where I've seen every agency come together because there's a unified goal. And we may not have unity of command on our effort to get things done here, but we definitely have unity of effort. And so this is where I've sensed just a tremendous coming together, collaboration amongst US government federal agencies. And then to combine the 64 geographic jurisdictions in that. So to get New York to agree to what the federal government wants to do, and then manage the 49 other states to agree to that as well, almost an impossibility. But when you start sharing with transparency all the information that we have available and the resources we have available, it's amazing what people will do to come together and to make sure that we achieve the end state of maximizing the number of vaccines that we're putting into the arms of Americans. So that's just on the public side. On the private side, working with industry, no doubt they operate with business in mind, and it's about profit to a certain degree. But the majority of the companies that we've been partnering with, they understand that this is a pandemic that is going to have generational effects. And so to a large degree, they've been willing to underwrite risk on their level, as well as receiving US government assistance to underwrite risk, to ensure that they're providing maximum opportunity to deliver vaccines for the American people as well. And so to a large degree, they sacrificed a bit of business. There's intellectual proprietary rights.
Right.
They have kind of opened their doors to the government. And so when they actually did clinical trials with their product using US government dollars, they actually gave us, the US government, insights as to what was happening in those clinical trials so that we could observe and help them shape how they were going to do it. And so this private and public partnership has really been embraced by all of the partners. It becomes very obvious very quickly when we have a partner that's just there to play, but not necessarily play on the team. And those people quickly write themselves out of the mission. We haven't had to do that too much. However, the majority of folks, in terms of this public-private partnership, we see this as a tremendous success story, and it'll definitely be documented so that in future pandemic responses, because once COVID is over, hopefully it's decades before we get another pandemic. Hopefully we don't ever get another pandemic. But if we do, we'll have a model. We'll have success on a successfully documented program that they can pull on for the future.
A blueprint for the future. I mean, that's so much of what we talk about in a variety of ways these days is future proofing. And one question that's a little bit of a follow-up is, could you perhaps expand a little bit on the DoD specific activities and how it was able to provide support at various levels, and also in terms of your liaisoning across the government. The DoD housed this, and the operational capability there, perhaps to those of us who understand it, made the DoD an obvious choice for this program. But I think there are others who might not quite understand that.
So I think Department of Defense's contribution and really comes into, it provides horsepower, is what it does. I think in terms of a normal vaccination campaign, and CDC runs vaccination campaigns every year as part of influenza, all of the structure exists for them to do that, from the acquisition piece that really Health and Human Services does, to the vaccinations for children's programs that CDC runs, to what the FDA does in terms of reviewing vaccines. I think what Department of Defense was able to do is come in and provide additional horsepower to ensure that we could accelerate it. And so the three primary areas that we've been able to inject Department of Defense culture into this process really had to do with leadership and planning, logistics, planning and execution, and then contracting capability as well. That's one of the lesser known things that the Department of Defense does provide. But in addition to Health and Human Services, contracting effort, acquisition efforts that they have, Department of Defense also contributed their contracting expertise as well. And so if there's anything that the military does extremely well, I'll tell you though, it's planning, planning, planning
Planning, right.
for every potential contingency that's out there. And so by us looking at this situation from the very beginning and looking at all different types of opportunities in which vaccines would come first and what parts of the country needed servicing first, and how we would deal with the magnitude of the logistics requirement that we knew was just going to be popped on us when an emergency use authorization was given. Um, the military was able to adjust and plan on those and make sure that whatever happened, we just had that contingency plan on the shelf that we would pull out and then could execute very easily. My expectation, and again, this is my personal expectation, not position of the government, is that as we move forward, there's going to be a requirement, and HHS, Health and Human Services, may define that requirement in terms of where do we go next?
Right.
How long do we need to maintain this effort? I don't know when end state is. One of the benefits of being my military experience is whenever they put you in a job, you sprint at that job until somebody tells you to stop. And so I'm going to be here working at the operation until somebody tells me, stop, we've got enough vaccines flowing to the American people, we need to move in another direction. But until that time, Department of Defense is fully committed to this mission. Okay.
Spectacular. Well, I think everybody in the country should be thankful that that you guys are, and then that you were assigned this somewhat gargantuan task. In relation to what you said about contracting and working with industry, I was wondering if you could discuss briefly what the role of the Defense Production Act was in ensuring materials and facilities for this rapid development and distribution.
So we've used the Defense Production Act 18 times since we've been here in existence at the operation. And primarily what we've used the Defense Production Act is to secure the supply chain for the primary manufacturers that are producing vaccine candidates. And so right now we're working with 6 producers, only 2 of whom have an emergency use authorization at that time. That's Pfizer and Moderna. And what we've attempted to do is work with them and secure their supply chains down to sometimes 5th and 6th tier providers of raw materials and equipment.
Wow.
And that not only ensures that they have a steady flow of consumables used in vaccine production, but also in some cases, building out of additional production lines. And so that, in terms of Pfizer and Moderna, what we're able to do with them is ramp up the amount of consumables that are being produced within the United States so that they can then double the amount of vaccines they provide for the American people, or in some cases, reduce by half their ability to produce the same amount of vaccines in half the amount of time. And so the Defense Production Act has been very effective for us in terms of securing that supply chain.
And that's it's not invoked frequently, but clearly it was a critical decision here. And then from that production, could you perhaps briefly discuss the interface between and the process between your team in terms of the production of the vaccine and distribution to the states? Because it was a really important point that you made earlier, that you're getting vaccines to these 64 jurisdictions. How they then get shots in arms is a different process that is governed internally to them, that they should exercise their expertise in regards to. Different populations, different jurisdictions clearly have different needs for local distribution. So can you talk about the interface between your team and those 64 jurisdictions a little bit?
Yeah, and that's a point that we've been discussing since the very beginning. And it really does boil down to what are federal responsibilities and what are state rights or state responsibilities. From the very beginning, the states came up on board, and I use states generically to include all of the jurisdictions, including the territories. They were very clear that in their minds, they own the process in terms of vaccinating their people, their population. They were very clear that they understood not only the makeup of their population, but also the facilities that could support vaccinating within their population. And so what we tried to do at the federal level was not overstep bounds by saying we're going to do this as a U.S. government in your state.
Right.
So we were very cautious of doing that. One example is the immunization information systems. So those database systems are owned by the states, and each one runs its own system. It's not existing on a common server anywhere. Some, it was as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, oversimplifying the matter. Some were Oracle based, some were Microsoft based, some were ERP based that came from a third party. And so what we attempted to do, and we didn't want to overstep our bounds, is we did not want to create a federal database for immunization information systems, because we felt that that would be overstepping or stepping on the state's responsibilities and rights. But what we were very careful to do, and because we knew we needed to see that data, is we created data use agreements with each of the 64 jurisdictions and the 5 federal entities that manage their own immunization information systems. By doing that in advance and making sure that there was an exchange of data that we could pull, we ensured that the right people got the right access to the right vaccine at the right time. Particularly with 2-dose vaccines.
Right.
Zaheer, if you were to receive a certain type of vaccine on the 1st of February, we knew that either 21 days later or 28 days later, if Pfizer is 21 days, Moderna is 28 days, we knew that you must receive your second vaccine dose. So it was incumbent upon the federal government, who was responsible for distribution, to work hand in hand with the state to ensure that your second dose arrived on time at the right location. And so that's just one vignette of the cooperation that we do on a daily basis with the jurisdictions to ensure that we're getting the right amount of doses to the right locations at the right time. Over.
Oh, that's amazing stuff, because there's so many facets to that. Even that simple example, some people might have suggested a rush, get everybody their first vaccine, and you've got 28 days to make the rest happen. Well, that might not be the best. That might not be the most logical thing. There is a flow rate that is available. There's a maximum flow rate that's available, and you have to manage how you're stacking those vaccines based off of that, rather than going for 28-day immunity, which is then wasted, and you have to give people shots again. So it's a subtle point, perhaps, to some, but it's a critical one. Now, we understand that things are changing. And you mentioned that your team is going to sprint until you're told to stop or to change direction. Can you briefly discuss how it has changed, how your posture has changed? Because you mentioned you went from testing to therapeutics and now to vaccination. How do you, has it changed, or do you see it changing in the next few months, or is it full bore? Get as many of these dose 1, dose 2s out as possible?
So I would say that we've changed and morphed over time. And so this operation, formerly known as Operation Warp Speed, it started with 2 people. So when the president realized he needed to assign extra manpower to kind of work at this problem so that we didn't mess it up, he leaned on the Department of Defense. He went to the Secretary of Defense and said, hey, give me your best man. Tell me who needs to do this. And so they grabbed General Gustav Perna, who was at the time commanding Army Materiel Command. And then they went to Health and Human Services and said, hey, tell me your best scientist, your best doctor that can do vaccination programs. And Health and Human Services said, oh, that's Dr. Monsef Slaoui. And so it all started with 2 people, and then based on the requirements of the mission, as we were in the campaign, they built out this operations team. And so in the beginning, we were recruiting a lot of technical experts from both Health and Human Services as well as Department of Defense on research and development and acquisition, because that's where we're working development of vaccines and therapeutics at that time. And then as we got a little bit farther down into the campaign, we were starting to get some candidates that were promising in the clinical trials, and manufacturing became more important. And so we ramped up our our talent here on the team with acquisition experts and manufacturing experts. And then as we got into the vaccination campaign itself, where we're actually putting distribution and shots in arm, we brought a bunch more logisticians in. And then we started to draw down our lab and R&D personnel. And so I think the largest that we've been in terms of overall strength was just over 110 people.
Wow.
To manage this federal
operation.
And now I think our today's total, I believe, is just over 100. And so it's not just about growing. We kind of grow and reduce based on the needs of the campaign. And so right now our focus is primarily on continuing to secure the supply chain for the manufacturers. It's on distribution, so heavy into logistics. And then we also have some regional representatives that assist the jurisdictions. And so they're kind of more of the medical professionals that work hand in hand with the CDC to make sure that that integration between the federal effort and the jurisdiction effort are smooth every day. And so our effort is kind of on the tail end of the supply chain right now, which is distribution and uptake into arms.
Spectacular. General, thank you so much for your time today. We truly appreciate it. You've helped us understand this major operation and really helped also move forward the discussion on critical supply chain, which is going to be so much more important throughout our discussion. And today we're talking about American reshoring. We're talking about critical supply chain, secure supply chain as well. I think all those topics, you guys have brought it together in this prototypical form. And I expect that the blueprint that you guys have created is going to be replicated not only in healthcare and therapeutics, but is likely to be modified and carried over to a variety of industries. Before we sign off with you, sir, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say provide some closing comments, if you like.
Zaheer, thank you very much. And I will provide one, and really it's an appeal. So what we've been attempting to do, or what I've been attempting to do in this call, is really broaden enlightenment, tell you what we're about and what we're doing. The one thing I want to clearly confirm and affirm for you is that the vaccines that we've developed, and again, Pfizer and Moderna have an emergency use authorization. Johnson & Johnson is being considered by the FDA this week. We could potentially have a decision by the end of this week. Safety and science and data have driven that process from the very beginning. So I can personally assure you of the safety and efficacy of these vaccines that the US government is putting out. Now that you know this information, what I really appeal for you to do is emphasize to your local communities the importance of receiving these vaccines when they're available to you. The sooner that we can increase the vaccine rate for the American population, the sooner that we can start getting back to, close to normal culture and economy that the United States needs to have. We are leading the world in our ability to deliver vaccines to the people. Could there be more? Absolutely. And we're going to continue to push to get more and more out every day. But I think the rest of the world is watching the United States on how we're doing this, and they're going to start replicating what we're doing so that they can vaccinate their populations as well. But we need to get the United States back to normal. We need to get our kids back to school. We need to get the economy running again. And I think vaccinations will be the way that we achieve that. So here, thank you for your time today. And for the entire audience, thank you. I really appreciate being on this call today.
Well, sir, from the America's Future Series, and indeed from the whole of America, thank you and your team for your efforts. People say unprecedented and use a lot of words like that. My instinct is that in your career, This is simply not your first rodeo, and that it's so good to have you in the saddle moving forward. Take care, sir, and the best and continued luck to you and the team. Goodbye.